Julia Benton had always been methodical, to the point where even her husband joked that she could set her watch by the way she brushed her teeth. Everything in her life operated on invisible tracks. Early mornings at her freelance copywriting desk, midday coffee on the porch, muted calls with clients, her evening walk, and dinner precisely at 7:15. She liked that her world was self-contained and predictable, but there was something about the cream envelope that didn't belong, not just because it had no stamp, no return address, but because it was inside the house on the small side table by the front door, when no one had visited all day. The handwriting on the front was careful, almost delicate. Julia Benton. And what was inside would make her question everything she thought she knew about her carefully ordered life. The argument with Michael earlier that day had felt jarringly off-script. It wasn't loud or aggressive, they rarely fought, but something about it stuck under her skin. He had accused her of being distracted lately, of checking out during conversations. "You're not even here half the time," he had said, gesturing with his coffee mug. "I'll be talking and you'll just drift away." She had snapped back, denying it. But in truth, she had been feeling off for weeks, not in a way she could explain, just slightly unmoored, like she was walking into rooms and forgetting why. Like objects didn't always seem quite where she remembered leaving them. She chalked it up to stress from her latest project deadline. The letter arrived around 3 p.m., several hours after the argument. Julia had been working in her home office, the words on her screen blurring as her thoughts kept circling back to Michael's accusations. When she went downstairs for another cup of tea, she spotted it, just sitting there, inside the house. Thinking Michael might have left it as a way of smoothing things over, she opened it without much thought, but the contents stopped her cold. "You didn't handle today's argument very well, but that's not unusual." She read the sentence 3 times. Today's argument. It had happened only a few hours ago. There was no way this letter could have been written and delivered in that time frame, let alone found its way inside the house. And Michael wasn't the type to write notes, certainly not ones like this. She read on, heart thudding against her ribs. "When you turned away from him and shut the pantry door too hard, I could tell you wanted to say more. You always do that. Retreat when you should advance. Hide when you should fight. It's been your pattern for years. I've noticed." The writer spoke with a familiarity that unsettled her deeply. They knew her gestures, her tone, even the look on her face when she'd turned away from Michael. It wasn't angry. It was observant, like someone had been in the room, like someone knew her routines, intimately. Julia looked around the kitchen, suddenly aware of the silence pressing in from all sides. She walked to the front door and checked. The lock secure. The back door too. All windows closed. She called Michael at work, keeping her voice steady. "Did you leave me a note today at home?" His confusion seemed genuine. "No, why would I do that?" "No reason, just wondering." She hung up before he could ask more questions. That night she couldn't sleep. The letter was in her nightstand drawer, but its presence filled the room. Michael slept soundly beside her, his breathing even and deep. She stared at his familiar profile in the dim light filtering through the curtains. 15 years of marriage. She knew every line of his face. Or, at least she thought she did. The next morning, Julia took photographs of how things were arranged before leaving each room. The angle of the throw pillows on the couch, the exact position of the books on her nightstand, the way she'd left her pen on top of her planner. When she returned to her office after lunch, the pen was on the right side of the planner, not the left where she'd photographed it. A small change. So small, she would normally never notice. But now, over the next few days, Julia couldn't let go of the letter. She read it compulsively, looking for clues in the phrasing, the pen pressure, anything that might explain it rationally. Michael had denied having anything to do with it, and she believed him. But that only made it worse. She started noticing other things. The living room rug seemed slightly shifted. The window latch in the office half open when she was sure she'd closed it. Her planner, which never left her desk, was on the kitchen counter one morning, open to next week's appointments with a corner folded down. She began setting traps, tiny paper slips in drawers to see if they were disturbed, a single strand of hair placed across the threshold of rarely used doors. Some nights, she'd hear faint creaks in the hallway, but Michael would be sound asleep, beside her. "Are you okay?" Michael asked over dinner a week after the first letter appeared. "You seem, I don't know, on edge." "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Just that project deadline. It's more than that. You keep checking the doors, looking out windows." He reached for her hand across the table. "Talk to me, Jules." She almost did. Almost told him about the letter, the moved objects, the feeling of being watched. But something held her back. What if he thought she was losing it? What if she was losing it? Instead, she squeezed his hand and forced a smile. "I'm just tired. I'll be better once this week is over." That night, she dreamed of someone standing in the corner of their bedroom, watching. A figure just beyond the reach of recognition. She woke sweating at 3:17 a.m. and couldn't fall back asleep. The second letter arrived a week after the first. This time, it was in her coat pocket, the coat she had worn earlier that morning on her walk. Again, no indication of how it had gotten there. No one had come close to her all day. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "You don't need to say sorry to him. He won't hear it the way you mean it anyway. You never did learn how to be heard, Julia." That line hit something raw, because it was true. She often felt like she didn't express herself right, like her words came out crooked when emotions ran high. Michael would interpret her apologies as dismissals, her explanations as excuses. The letter understood that, understood her, which made it infinitely worse. "Your careful system of checking doors and windows is admirable if misguided. You're looking outward when you should be looking inward. The call is coming from inside the house, as they say." She crumpled the letter in her fist, then immediately smoothed it out again, carefully refolding it along its original creases. She slipped it into her drawer with the first one, her mind racing. That evening, while Michael was in the shower, she called a security company. The earliest they could come out was next week. Too long. The hardware store had cameras she could install herself. Small ones, wireless, that connected to an app on her phone. She bought 3 the next morning and installed them discreetly. One facing the front door, one in the hallway with a view of the living room, and one in her office. She told Michael it was for peace of mind. "Recent break-ins in the neighborhood," she said. He seemed concerned but didn't press. "Whatever helps you feel safe," he said, kissing her forehead. For 3 days, nothing happened. The cameras recorded normal household routines, Michael coming and going, Julia moving between rooms, the mail carrier dropping letters through the slot. Ordinary life continuing on its predictable track. The 4th morning, she awoke to find a 3rd letter. This one was lying on her keyboard in the office. She immediately checked the footage on her phone. The timestamp showed a static freeze, exactly 2:37 a.m. to 2:40 a.m., a brief blackout, on all 3 cameras simultaneously. The letter was different this time. No analysis of a recent fight, no commentary on her behavior, just a single sentence. "When you watch it back, don't forget that memory lies." That line unnerved her more than anything else so far. She re-watched the camera footage over and over. The freeze was clean, no glitches before or after. Just 3 minutes gone, the cameras resumed, the hallway unchanged. But something about the living room felt off. She paused the frame and stared. A picture frame, one of her and Michael from 3 years ago at the lake, was tilted slightly to the right. She was absolutely certain it had been straight the night before. Julia took the frame down. Behind it, tucked between the photograph and the back panel, was a folded note, smaller than the others. It read, "You were right to wonder, but wrong about what you were wondering about." No signature. No date. She sat down heavily on the couch, the note and picture frame in her lap. The photo showed her and Michael at the lake house they'd rented for their anniversary. His arm was around her shoulders, both of them smiling. But looking at it now, she noticed something she'd never seen before. Her smile didn't quite reach. Her eyes. There was something tight around the corners of her mouth. Something forced. Why had she never noticed that before? She flipped the frame over and looked at the back. The date was written in Michael's neat handwriting, July 15th, 2022, 3 years ago. It had been warm that day. They'd gone swimming in the lake. Then dinner at that little place in town with the string lights on the patio. But wait, that wasn't right. They'd argued that day. About something trivial, the route to take back to the cabin or what time to eat dinner. She remembered being irritated, wanting space. They hadn't gone swimming at all. Had they? Julia put the frame down and pressed her fingers to her temples. Why couldn't she remember clearly? It was only 3 years ago. She pulled out her phone and scrolled back through her photos from that trip. There they were at the lake house, photos of the view from the deck, photos of a deer that had wandered into the yard. But no swimming photos, no dinner photos with string lights. She did find one photo of Michael alone on the deck, looking out at the water. His posture was tense, shoulders hunched, not the posture of a man enjoying a romantic getaway. That night she barely slept. Michael noticed, but didn't ask. The next morning, Julia called in sick to her client meeting and drove to the local library. She sat at a computer in the back corner and searched for information about memory distortion, gaslighting, carbon monoxide poisoning, anything that might explain what was happening. Carbon monoxide caused memory issues and confusion, but not specific planted memories or strange notes. Gaslighting was possible, but Michael seemed genuinely confused by her behavior lately, not manipulative. And who else would have access to their home? She tried another search. Found notes in-house. Don't remember writing. Most results were about carbon monoxide again, or sleepwalking, or dissociative disorders. Could she be writing the notes herself, in some kind of fugue state? It seemed impossible. The handwriting didn't match hers. It was more delicate, more precise. She printed several articles about dissociative disorders and folded them into her bag. When she got home, the house was quiet. Michael wouldn't be back from work for hours. She went straight to her office and pulled out all 3 letters, spreading them on her desk alongside a page of her own handwriting. They weren't the same, not even close, but something about the letters nagged at her, something familiar. She went to their bedroom and opened the small wooden box where she kept important mementos, birthday cards from Michael, letters from her grandmother. A few notes from her mother before she died 5 years ago. She froze, staring at one of her mother's letters, the handwriting. It wasn't identical to the mystery letters, but it was similar. The way the Y's looped, the slight slant to the right, the precise spacing between words, but that was impossible. Her mother had been dead for 5 years, and these letters mentioned events from last week. Julia sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning. She pulled out her phone and checked the camera footage again. Still nothing unusual, except for those missing 3 minutes. She decided to review older footage, scrolling back through days of recordings. Nothing unusual during the daytime. At night, just darkness and occasional movement as she or Michael got up to use the bathroom. And then, she saw it. 2 nights ago, 2:14 a.m. She watched herself get out of bed. On the screen, she moved differently, more fluidly, more purposefully than her usual middle-of-the-night stumble to the bathroom. She watched herself walk down the hallway, out of the camera's view. 20 minutes later, she reappeared, walking. Back to the bedroom. Julia didn't remember any of it. With shaking hands, she checked the footage from other nights. There it was again. And again. Different times, 1:46 a.m., 3:22 a.m., 2:37 a.m., but the same fluid, purposeful movement, always lasting between 15 and 25 minutes. What was she doing during those missing minutes? Was she writing the letters herself? But why wouldn't she remember? And why would she write things that unsettled her so deeply? She heard the front door open. Michael was home early. "Jules?" he called out. She quickly closed the video app and shoved the letters back into her drawer. "In the bedroom," she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. He appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Hey, you feeling better? Your text said you were staying home sick today." "A little better," she said. "Just a headache." He sat beside her on the bed. "I was thinking, maybe we should get away this weekend. Go back to that lake house we rented a few years ago. You loved it there." Julia stared at him. "The lake house where we went swimming?" "Swimming?" He laughed. You refused to go in, remember? Said the water was too cold even though it was July. She didn't remember that, or rather she hadn't. Remembered it until just now when he said it. Suddenly the memory was there, standing on the dock, Michael trying to convince her to jump in, her refusing because the water looked dark and uninviting. Right, she said slowly. Of course. That night, Julia set up her phone to record herself sleeping. She placed it on the dresser, angled toward the bed and let it run all night. In the morning, she waited until Michael left for work, then played back the footage. 2:19 a.m. She sat up in bed. Not suddenly, like waking from a nightmare, but smoothly, deliberately. She turned her head slowly and looked directly at the camera for nearly 30 seconds, her face expressionless in the dim light. Then she got up and walked out of frame. At 2:43 a.m., she returned, got back into bed and lay still. Julia played it again. The way she looked at the camera, it was like she knew it was there, like she knew she was being recorded. But she had no memory of any of it. She called her doctor and made an appointment for that afternoon. She described her symptoms, memory lapses, finding things moved, feeling disoriented. She didn't mention the letters. That seemed too bizarre, too difficult to explain. The doctor listened patiently, asked about her sleep, her stress levels, any medications. He ordered blood work, suggested she track her sleep patterns, and recommended a neurologist. It could be many things, he said reassuringly. Sleep disturbances, stress, even early perimenopause can cause memory issues. Let's rule out the physical causes first. She nodded, but knew the tests wouldn't explain the letters, or how she could write them without remembering. Over the following days, no more letters arrived. The house seemed still again. Nothing was out of place. But Julia's sense of reality had shifted, quietly but irrevocably. She found herself walking through her days, hyper-aware of her own habits, her own expressions, her own past. She continued recording herself at night. Some nights, nothing happened. Other nights, she would get up and leave the room for 20 minutes or so. Once, she returned with something in her hand that she put in her nightstand drawer before going back to sleep. The next morning, she checked the drawer. Inside was a small notebook she didn't recognize. The first several pages were blank, but in the middle she found her own handwriting, only more precise, more controlled than her usual script. Julia, you won't remember writing this. That's okay. Part of you knows what's happening, but you're not ready to face it. When you are, you'll find me where you first lost track. Look for the time that doesn't add up. She closed the notebook, her heart pounding. This wasn't like the other letters. This was undeniably her own handwriting, just different somehow, more deliberate. Where had she first lost track? What did that mean? She thought back to when the strangeness began. The argument with Michael, the first letter before that. Everything had seemed normal, hadn't it? She opened her planner and flipped back through the weeks. Her scheduled client calls, meetings, deadlines. Everything was there, recorded in her orderly handwriting. But on some days, there were small marks in the corners of certain pages. Dots, or tiny check marks she didn't remember making. She counted them. One mark every 3 days going back in 6 months, long before she'd noticed anything strange happening. Why every third day? What was significant about... She froze. Every third day. She thought about the night recordings. She'd checked several random nights, but not systematically. She pulled out her phone and looked at the dates when she'd recorded herself getting up in the night. They were all every third night. Was there a pattern she hadn't noticed? Some cycle she was unconsciously following? She went to the kitchen calendar where they tracked bills and social events. She counted back from the day of the first letter. 21 days earlier, exactly 7 cycles of her every third day pattern was circled in red. March 17th. She had no memory of circling that date. No memory of what might have happened then. She checked her planner. March 17th was blank except for a small check mark in the corner. She called Michael at work. Do you remember anything special happening on March 17th? This year? Let me think. There was a pause. Oh, that was the day you had that weird episode at the restaurant, remember? You zoned out for like 10 minutes and then insisted we leave immediately. She didn't remember, not at all. What restaurant? That new place downtown. You said the lighting was giving you a headache. A vague image formed, harsh pendant lights over a polished concrete floor, the smell of garlic and wine, but nothing about zoning out or leaving suddenly. And then what happened? We came home. You went to bed early. Said you weren't feeling well. He sounded concerned now. Jules, are you okay? You really don't remember this? Just checking my timeline for something, she said, trying to sound casual. Thanks. She hung up and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the calendar. March 17th. Something had happened that day, something significant enough that part of her had been marking time ever since, operating on some 3-day cycle she wasn't consciously aware of. That night, as Michael slept beside her, Julia feigned sleep until his breathing became deep and regular. Then she carefully got out of bed, took her phone, and went downstairs to the living room. She sat in the dark and opened her photo library. She scrolled back to March, looking for anything from around the 17th. There were photos from March 13th, a client meeting. Then nothing until March 22nd, a photo of their backyard after Michael had done some landscaping. Nothing from the missing days. She opened her text messages and scrolled back. On March 17th, she had texted Michael at 1:14 p.m. Feeling weird today, might take a nap. He had replied, okay, feel better. Don't forget dinner reservation at 7. Then at 6:37 p.m., she had texted, ready whenever you are. That was it. Nothing. Unusual in the text. Nothing to explain what had happened at the restaurant or why she might have started this strange pattern of nighttime activities. She put her phone down and looked around the dark living room. For the first time in weeks, she felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else. A growing certainty that she wasn't losing her mind. That something specific had happened, and part of her knew what it was. When you watch it back, don't forget that memory lies, the third letter had said. Memory lies. But her body remembered, even if her mind didn't. Every third night, like clockwork. She stood up and walked slowly through the house, letting her feet guide her, through the living room, past the kitchen, into the small home office. She rarely used because she preferred working upstairs. This had been Michael's office originally, but he'd moved to the guest bedroom when she needed more space for her freelance work. In the dark, she felt along the bookshelf. Her fingers stopped on a leather-bound journal she didn't recognize. She pulled it out and took it to the desk, turning on the small lamp. The journal was locked, but the small key was taped to the back cover. Her hands moved as if they'd done this before, unlocking it with practiced ease. Inside was her handwriting. Again, that more precise, controlled version. Daily entries dating back 6 months. The entry for March 17th was longer than the others. It happened again today at the restaurant. 1 minute I was looking at the menu, the next Michael was shaking my arm, looking worried, saying I'd been staring at nothing for nearly 10 minutes. But I wasn't gone. I was right there. I remember the entire conversation about his promotion, about maybe taking a trip this summer. He doesn't remember any of that. Says we never discussed it. Says I just froze mid-sentence, and then when I came back, I was a different person. Insisted we leave immediately. Different how, I asked him later. Colder, he said, more precise. He looked afraid to say it. This is the third time he's described me this way after these episodes. The doctor says it's just stress, dissociation. But it doesn't feel like I'm dissociating. It feels like I'm remembering something else, something that happened in a slightly different way. I'm starting to think both are true. Both happened, somehow. Julia stared at the page, her breath caught in her throat. She flipped forward, reading quickly. More entries about episodes. Times when she would experience events one way, but Michael would describe them completely differently. Times when she would lose hours, only to have Michael insist they were together the whole time, having conversations she couldn't remember. And then entries about her system. Every third night seems to work. I can surface then, when she's deeply asleep. I can check the cameras she's installed, make sure nothing is recorded. I can leave notes for her, try to make her understand gradually. Direct confrontation would be too traumatic. She needs to discover this on her own terms. The letters are helping. She's paying attention now. Julia closed the journal, her hands trembling. She was writing to herself. Some part of her was aware during these episodes, was trying to communicate with her waking self. But why? What was she trying to tell herself? She flipped to the most recent entry, dated just 3 days ago. She's close now. She started to notice the patterns. Soon she'll be ready to remember what happened at the lake house. What she saw, Michael. Do what she couldn't bear to know. Julia sat motionless, the journal open in her lap. The lake house 3 years ago. Images flashed through her mind, not the posed photo of them smiling, but something else. Michael on the phone, speaking urgently when he thought she was napping. A name she didn't recognize, plans she wasn't supposed to hear, money being moved, and later, back home, documents she wasn't meant to see. Her phone buzzed on the desk, startling her. A text from Michael. "Where are you? It's 3 a.m. She looked at the time. 3:14 a.m. She'd been sitting here for over an hour. "Getting water," she texted back. "Be right up." She closed the journal, locked it, and returned it to its hiding place on the shelf. As she turned to leave the office, she caught sight of herself in the small decorative mirror on the wall. For a brief moment, her reflection seemed to hold her gaze with a knowing look. A look that said, "Now you're starting to understand." Because the real terror wasn't who had left the letters, or even how they had gotten there. It was the slowly creeping suspicion that they weren't wrong. The letters knew things only she knew, truths buried beneath her routines, beneath the carefully constructed quiet of her life. And now, every time she raised her voice, or reached for the coffee mug, or shut the pantry door a little too hard, she wondered, is someone watching again? Or was someone always watching, from inside the memory itself? She turned off the lamp and headed upstairs, a new resolve forming. Tomorrow she would look deeper into what had really happened 3 years ago at the lake house. Tomorrow she would face what part of her already knew. Because if you followed this story all the way to this haunting revelation, you know some truths can only be recognized when we're finally ready to see them. If this psychological journey into the fragmented self kept you on edge until now, leave a like and subscribe. The next story might be waiting for you already, and there is more. Waiting just beside this one. Maybe it explains what was missing here. Maybe it makes everything worse. You listened, but not everything was told.